The officer's hand closed around the bride's wrist, the cold metal of the cuff scraping against her lace gown as 200 guests watched in stunned silence. He was arresting her for a noise complaint during her own wedding vows, not knowing the distinguished older man in full military dress at the altar, her father, was a four-star general with a direct line to the Secretary of Defense. This was the Willow Creek Gardens, a venue that had hosted 100 peaceful weddings. The responding officer saw just another loud party in a wealthy neighborhood, a routine noise complaint from a neighbor 600 feet away. He didn't see a military family's sacred moment, or the rows of medals on the father's chest that represented decades of service. In that split second, a documented pattern of police escalation collided with an unshakable legacy of command. And the officer was about to learn a devastating lesson about power, protocol, and who truly answers to whom. Maya Thorne had planned every detail of her wedding for 18 months, from the baby's breath in her hair to the song for her father-daughter dance with General James Thorne. The four-star general, a legend in Pentagon corridors for his disciplined command, had only one request for his daughter's day: that he could stand at the altar not as a commander, but simply as a father. 200 guests, a mix of family, friends, and senior military officials, gathered under a floral arch as golden hour light bathed the gardens. The scene was picturesque, peaceful, and utterly ordinary for a Saturday evening in an affluent suburb. But one neighbor, living in a house 600 feet away through a dense thicket of trees, had been waiting for this. At 6:45 p.m., as the minister began the vows, that neighbor placed a call to the non-emergency line. The complaint was specific: excessive amplified music and large crowd noise violating local decibel ordinances. The call was routed to County Sheriff's Deputy Mark Ryland, a 12-year veteran known for his zero-tolerance approach to quality-of-life offenses in this district. Deputy Ryland had shut down 3 parties just that month, each time citing a municipal code that allowed for summary enforcement to abate a noise nuisance. His record showed a pattern. Responses in this wealthy, predominantly white zip code resulted in warnings 70% of the time. Responses in the less affluent, mixed demography South Side almost always led to citations or arrests. He saw his role as maintaining the community's character. He arrived at 7:03 p.m., his cruiser rolling quietly up the gravel drive. He heard the string quartet, the officiant's voice, the occasional happy murmur from the crowd. From his perspective, this was another wealthy family assuming their celebration trumped county law. He didn't check the venue's posted permit, which was, in fact, valid and displayed at the entrance. He didn't know that Willow Creek Gardens, while facing $70,000 in fines for past zoning issues, was fully authorized for this event. He saw a gate, a private property sign, and a uniformed security guard, a retired sergeant major named Roy Carter, who stepped forward with a polite smile. "Good evening, officer. Can I help you?" Roy asked, his posture relaxed but professional. "Noise complaint," Ryland stated, not returning the smile. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge of this event." "That would be the wedding coordinator, sir. The ceremony is just concluding. If you could wait perhaps 10 minutes, I'm sure." "I'll speak to them now," Ryland interrupted, moving past Roy toward the seated guests. His amplified voice cut through the tender moment. "Everyone, this gathering is in violation of county noise ordinance. It needs to disperse immediately." A wave of shocked silence washed over the crowd, followed by nervous whispers. At the altar, Maya Thorne froze, her hand in her fiancé's. General Thorne turned slowly, his expression shifting from paternal joy to focused assessment. The deputy's gaze landed on Maya, the most visibly central figure. "Ma'am, are you the one responsible for this event?" This is my wedding," Maya said, her voice a mix of disbelief and rising anger. "Then you're the one I need to speak to. Step away from the altar, please." The request hung in the air, absurd and offensive. Her father, General Thorne, took a half step forward, his voice a low, controlled baritone. "Officer, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. The venue has a permit. The music is acoustic. Can we discuss this reasonably after the ceremony?" Deputy Ryland's hand went to his belt. He was used to deference, not negotiation. "Sir, step back. I'm not asking the young lady again. Ma'am, you need to come with me to address this complaint." He moved forward, closing the distance. Guests pulled out phones, recording as he reached for Maya's wrist. The cold steel of a handcuff touched her skin, right over the delicate lace of her $7,500 gown. A collective gasp erupted. This was the moment, the sacred, universal moment of a wedding, violated by procedural enforcement. But here's what Deputy Mark Ryland missed. As he focused on cuffing the bride, his peripheral vision registered the older black man in a formal suit, but he didn't process the details. He didn't see the 4 silver stars gleaming on each shoulder epaulette. He didn't recognize the rows of colorful ribbons and medals, the Distinguished Service Medal, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, that denoted a career of singular honor. He saw a father, an obstacle. He did not see General James Thorne, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a man whose direct superior was the Secretary of Defense, and whose daily decisions impacted global military strategy. The general's face became a mask of glacial calm. He didn't shout. He didn't physically intervene. He simply said, "Deputy, you will uncuff my daughter, now." Ryland smirked, securing the second cuff. "She's being detained for interfering with law enforcement in the execution of my duty. You can file a complaint at the station." He began to lead Maya, stumbling in her heels and gown, away from the altar. And then General Thorne did something that changed everything. He reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out not a wallet, but a slim, black satellite phone, a device reserved for national security-level communications. He pressed a single pre-programmed button, his eyes locked on the deputy. "Deputy Ryland," the general said, his voice carrying across the now-silent garden. "You have exactly 10 seconds to reconsider your position before you are speaking not to me, but to the legal attaché of the United States Department of Defense." Ryland paused, the smirk finally fading. He looked at the phone, then at the stars on the man's shoulders, truly seeing them for the first time. The blood drained from his face, but it was too late to back down gracefully. He keyed the microphone on his shoulder radio, his voice cracking slightly. "Unit 7, I need backup at the Willow Creek Gardens. I have a hostile situation with a large, non-compliant group, one in custody." At the same moment, the voice on the general's phone crackled to life. "General Thorne, secure line. What is your situation?" Act 1 ends with 2 calls for backup, one to a county sheriff's dispatcher, the other to the Pentagon. 2 entirely different worlds of authority were about to collide in a quiet suburban garden, and Deputy Mark Ryland had just placed himself squarely in the crossfire. The voice on the satellite phone was Colonel David Chen, the general's chief military aide, who was used to handling international crises, not wedding disruptions. "Sir, confirm your status. Are you under threat?" General Thorne's reply was clipped, professional, and devastating. "Negative. Personal event compromised by local law enforcement. My daughter, Maya Thorne, is currently in unlawful custody. Deputy Mark Ryland, County Sheriff's Badge number 743. I require immediate JAG liaison and DoD legal intervention. This is a Priority 1 familial integrity incident." The phrase Priority 1 familial integrity incident was a specific Pentagon protocol for threats against the immediate family of top command staff. It triggered an immediate, multi-agency response. Within 60 seconds, alerts flashed across screens at the Pentagon's National Military Command Center. Meanwhile, Deputy Ryland's call for backup brought 2 more county cruisers screeching up the driveway, their lights painting the white chairs in swirling red and blue. The newly arriving officers saw a confusing scene. A crying bride in handcuffs, a furious but calm older man on a phone, and 200 guests all holding up cell phones. Their sergeant, a burly man named O'Malley, approached Ryland. "Mark, what the hell is this? A wedding?" They refused to comply with a lawful order to disperse, Sarge. "This one," he gestured to General Thorne, "is being verbally hostile and threatening." Sergeant O'Malley looked at the general and his trained eyes went wide. He served 4 years in the Army Reserves. He knew what those 4 stars meant. A cold dread settled in his stomach. "Deputy, take the cuffs off the young lady. Now." "But Sarge, she—" "Now, Ryland." As Ryland fumbled with the key, the first signs of the other response arrived. Not sirens, but a low thrumming from above. A dark, unmarked helicopter with no navigation lights circled once overhead before veering off. Then, 3 black Suburbans with government plates rolled silently onto the property, parking in a tactical wedge formation. Men and women in dark suits and military dress uniforms emerged. They moved with an efficiency that made the county deputies look like amateurs. The lead was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a Navy Judge Advocate General's Corps pin on her lapel. "I'm Captain Rebecca Vance, Department of Defense Office of General Counsel. Who is the arresting officer?" Deputy Ryland, his confidence evaporating, stammered, "I am." There was a noise complaint. They were non-compliant. Captain Vance didn't look at him. She addressed Sergeant O'Malley. "Sergeant, you will secure your deputy's sidearm and place him in the back of your vehicle. He is to have no contact with anyone until federal investigators arrive. Is that understood?" The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been obliterated. The county officers, agents of local authority, were now spectators in a federal jurisdictional takeover. Maya's cuffs were removed. She ran to her father, who finally wrapped her in a tight embrace, his ceremonial uniform pressed against her torn wedding dress. But here, where the story splits into 2 parallel tracks, both racing toward an inevitable collision. Track 1, the immediate personal fallout. Track 2, the systemic viral explosion. On the personal track, Captain Vance presented General Thorne with a secure tablet. On it was a live video feed to the Office of the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary, a man who managed a $700 billion budget, was personally briefed on a county noise complaint. His directive was simple and severe. "Jim, we'll handle this. You take care of your family. The full weight of the department is behind you." The message was clear. The United States military would go to war legally for its second-in-command. Meanwhile, Sergeant O'Malley, following orders, escorted a pale and shaking Deputy Ryland to a cruiser. Ryland kept repeating, "I was just doing my job. The call came in. I followed procedure." But procedure had just met protocol, and protocol had won decisively. Now track 2, the digital wildfire. While the feds secured the scene, the 200 guests had not stopped recording. Dozens of videos from multiple angles were already being uploaded. One clip, focusing on the moment the cuff closed over Maya's lace sleeve, was posted with the hashtag #HandcuffBride. It gained 10,000 views in 5 minutes. Another, zooming in on General Thorne's medals and stars as he made the call, was tagged "Military Father." It went viral in military family circles instantly. By 8 p.m., just an hour after the incident, #HandcuffedBride was trending nationally on Twitter. News alerts popped up on phones. "Bride arrested at altar. Father reported to be high-ranking general." The story was a perfect storm of outrage ingredients: a wedding, police overreach, racial dynamics, and a shocking power reversal. But this is where the real investigation begins, because Deputy Mark Ryland wasn't just a rogue cop having a bad day. A search of his personnel file, now being pulled by both County Internal Affairs and, separately, by Pentagon investigators, revealed a documented pattern. In his 12 years, Ryland had generated 47% more use-of-force reports than the department average. He had been the subject of 8 civilian complaints, 6 of which were from people of color. All 8 were dismissed by internal review. His performance evaluations praised his proactive policing and strict enforcement of community standards, euphemisms that now took on a sinister tone. Furthermore, the data from the research is clear. Police are twice as likely to threat or use force against Black and Hispanic residents than against white residents during initiated interactions. Ryland's record was a microcosm of this national disparity. The neighbor who made the complaint, it was later learned, had a history of calling police on gatherings at the Willow Creek Gardens, a venue often booked by diverse clientele. The so-called noise complaint was a weaponized tool. Back at the wedding venue, now a federalized scene, Captain Vance methodically collected evidence. She requested the deputy's body camera footage. It had been accidentally switched off before he approached the altar. She requested the dispatch audio. The initial call from the neighbor was calm, not urgent, stating the music was annoying, not excessive. The escalation was entirely Deputy Ryland's creation. General Thorne, having ensured Maya was safe with her mother and bridesmaids, finally changed out of his uniform. In civilian clothes, he looked like a tired father, but his mind was working with strategic clarity. He told Captain Vance, "This isn't about me. It's about the pattern. How many people without a 4-star general for a father have had their lives upended by this kind of procedure?" His question hit the core of the scandal, because as the night wore on, the social media explosion began yielding tangible results. People started replying to the viral videos with their own stories. A Black family in the same county shared how their graduation barbecue was shut down last May by Deputy Ryland, who threatened to arrest the valedictorian for disorderly conduct. A Latino couple posted about being forced to leave a public park during their child's birthday party because their music was too loud, while a white family's party nearby was ignored. The narrative was crystallizing. This was not an isolated incident. It was a case study in biased enforcement, now blessed with the clearest evidence imaginable, a video showing it happening to a woman in a wedding gown, with the ultimate authority figure standing right there. By 10 p.m., the sheriff himself held an emergency press conference. He announced Deputy Ryland was placed on administrative leave pending a thorough internal investigation. He emphasized the department's commitment to justice and community trust. It was a standard damage control script. But it was too late. At 10:15, the other shoe dropped. The Department of Defense issued its own unprecedented statement. It read, "The department is aware of the deeply troubling incident involving the family of General James Thorne. The safety and constitutional rights of our service members and their families are paramount. We have mobilized appropriate legal resources and are cooperating fully with relevant authorities to ensure a complete and transparent review. We expect all applicable laws and procedures to be followed." The phrase "cooperating fully" was a legal thunderclap. It meant the Pentagon's vast investigative apparatus, its lawyers, its security experts, its influence, was now formally engaged in a local police matter. The county sheriff was no longer just investigating his deputy, he was being investigated by the federal government. And in a quiet office at the county district attorney's, an assistant DA reviewed the viral footage and the first pages of Ryland's personnel file. She saw what everyone was starting to see: a potential criminal case for false imprisonment, civil rights violations, and official misconduct. She also saw a public relations nightmare that could sink her boss's re-election. She picked up the phone to call the sheriff. The criminal and political wheels were beginning to turn in unison, threatening to crush Deputy Ryland and expose the system that empowered him. But just as the focus tightened on one deputy, a new, more shocking revelation was unearthed from the digital archive. A records request by a national newspaper, digging into the venue's troubled history, found something that would reframe the entire incident. Willow Creek Gardens had been fined over $70,000 for zoning violations. Yes. But the primary complainant in every single case, the person who had lodged 61 official complaints over 2 years, was the same neighbor who called in the wedding. And that neighbor, it turned out, was not just a concerned citizen. He was the brother of the county commissioner who oversaw the sheriff's department budget. This wasn't just bias. It smelled like a coordinated campaign. The connection wasn't a coincidence. It was a blueprint. The neighbor, Alan Brickman, had filed 61 complaints against Willow Creek Gardens over 2 years. His brother, County Commissioner Thomas Brickman, controlled the purse strings for the sheriff's department's budget, which was up for renewal the following month. The venue's owner, a Korean immigrant named Jae-hoon Park, had been fighting the Brickmans for years, claiming they wanted to bankrupt him so they could buy the land for a development deal. Every time Park booked an event for a client of color, a noise complaint would follow, and Deputy Ryland was often the responding officer. This wasn't just bias policing. It was potentially a conspiracy to harass a business out of existence, using the police as a tool. When a reporter from the Washington Post called Commissioner Brickman for comment, he angrily denied any coordination. "My brother is a private citizen. I have no control over what he complains about. This is a smear campaign by those who want to defund the police." But the timing was damning. The sheriff's department had recently requested a 15% budget increase, which Commissioner Brickman was championing. A show of tough, proactive policing in the wealthy district helped make that case. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense's investigation, led by Captain Vance, moved with quiet, terrifying efficiency. They subpoenaed every dispatch log, every body camera archive, and every personnel file for the entire sheriff's department shift that night. They weren't just looking at Ryland, they were auditing the entire system, and they found a pattern of code words. Complaints from the Brickman residents were logged as priority alpha calls, automatically bumped to the top of the queue. Officers who frequently handled these calls, like Ryland, received preferential shift assignments and overtime. Captain Vance presented her initial findings to General Thorne in a secure briefing room at a nearby Air Force base. "Sir, the data suggests a two-tiered response system. Calls from certain addresses get immediate, heavy-handed enforcement. Calls from others get a warning, if that. Deputy Ryland was a key player in that system, but he wasn't the architect." General Thorne stared at the flowcharts on the screen. "So my daughter's wedding was collateral damage in a local corruption scheme?" "It appears so, sir. And that scheme has ruined lives. We've identified 14 other events at that venue that were shut down, all for minority or immigrant families. 3 of those families are now pursuing civil rights lawsuits, emboldened by your case." But the system was fighting back. The county sheriff, facing an existential threat from both federal investigators and public outrage, made a desperate move. He held a second press conference, this time with Deputy Ryland by his side. Ryland, now in a civilian suit, looked contrite. The sheriff announced that after a preliminary review, the department had found Deputy Ryland's actions to be a tragic error in judgment, but not malicious. He was being suspended without pay for 30 days and would undergo retraining. The sheriff then pivoted, attacking the Department of Defense for federal overreach and intimidating local law enforcement. It was a classic playbook, reframe the aggressor as the victim, and it worked on a segment of the population. Conservative news outlets picked up the narrative of a decorated deputy being crucified by the woke military. Donations poured into a legal defense fund for Ryland. The story, which had been a clear-cut case of outrage, was now a political battleground. This backlash ignited a second, even more powerful wave of response. Military families across the country, incensed at seeing one of their highest-ranking leaders attacked, mobilized. Veterans groups and military spouses, networks used their formidable organizing power. They flooded the county switchboard with calls. They organized email campaigns to every member of the county board. They pointed out that if this could happen to the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, it could happen to any soldier's family back home. Their message was potent. We defend the nation. Who defends our families? The pressure became unbearable for local politicians. Commissioner Brickman, seeing his budget vote crumbling, attempted to cut a deal. He reached out to General Thorne's office through an intermediary, offering to make this whole thing go away. He promised to drop support for the sheriff's budget increase and facilitate a generous settlement for the Thorne family if the Pentagon would stand down its investigation. General Thorne's response was immediate and public. He issued a statement through the Pentagon press secretary. The United States military does not negotiate for the civil rights of its members. We seek justice, not settlements. The investigation will continue unimpeded. This principled stand had a seismic effect. It gave courage to the other families who had been harassed. Jae-hoon Park, the venue owner, gave a tearful interview to CNN, detailing the years of targeted complaints that brought him to the brink of bankruptcy. "They didn't just want my land," he said. "They wanted to send a message about who belongs in this neighborhood." Then the wait it gets worse moment arrived. An anonymous tip was sent to the local newspaper and the Dudee investigators simultaneously. It contained audio recordings. In them, Commissioner Brickman could be heard talking to the sheriff in a private club, joking about cleaning up the neighborhood and keeping the property values high. In another clip, he pressured the sheriff to handle the Willow Creek problem before the budget vote. The sheriff was heard replying, "My guys will keep the pressure on." Ryland's good at that. This was no longer about a noise complaint. This was evidence of a conspiracy to misuse law enforcement for personal and financial gain, with clear racial and economic targeting. The county district attorney, who had been hesitant, now had no choice. She convened a grand jury to consider charges against Commissioner Brickman, the sheriff, and Deputy Ryland for conspiracy, official misconduct, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Deputy Ryland, realizing he was being set up as the fall guy, broke ranks. Through his lawyer, he offered to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for immunity. He confirmed the Priority Alpha system and testified that he was encouraged by his superiors to be aggressive with complaints from the Brickman residents. He named names. The sheriff was placed on administrative leave. Commissioner Brickman resigned in disgrace. Justice, it seemed, was rolling forward. But for Maya Thorne and her family, the victory felt hollow. Her wedding was irreparably ruined. The photos showed her in tears, her dress torn, her special day forever marred by the memory of handcuffs. She suffered from anxiety and insomnia. The family was traumatized. General Thorne faced a moral dilemma. He could accept the systemic reforms being proposed, a federal consent decree for the sheriff's department, new oversight, sensitivity training, and move on. Or he could use his unique platform to demand something more fundamental. He called a private meeting with his daughter. "Maya, this isn't just our fight anymore," he told her. "We have the attention of the country. We can push for real change, but it will mean staying in the spotlight, reliving the worst moment of your life over and over. The choice is yours." Maya, after days of reflection, made her decision. She would not let her trauma be for nothing. She contacted the other families victimized by the scheme and the veterans groups that had supported them. Together, they drafted a proposal far more ambitious than anyone expected. They called it the Wedding Garden Accord, named for the venue where it all began. The accord demanded three things. First, the creation of an independent civilian review board with subpoena power and the authority to fire officers, a direct challenge to police union contracts. Second, the elimination of quality of life policing ordinances that were used disproportionately against communities of color. And third, a transparent, public mapping of all police dispatches and outcomes by race and zip code. They planned to launch it with a press conference at Willow Creek Gardens, exactly 1 month after the aborted wedding. The stage was set for a monumental clash between grassroots activism and entrenched power. The Thornes were no longer just victims seeking justice. They were architects of a rebellion, and the system they were challenging was preparing for war. The press conference at Willow Creek Gardens wasn't just covered by local news. The Attorney General of the United States was watching. As Maya Thorne stood at the microphone, flanked by her father in civilian clothes and a dozen other affected families, she didn't talk about her own pain. She talked about Jai-hoon Park's near bankruptcy, about the Latino family whose graduation party was ruined, about the black teens arrested for simply being in a park after dark. She presented the Wedding Garden Accord not as a list of demands, but as a covenant for equal protection. The reaction was volcanic. Police unions denounced it as an attack on law enforcement. Conservative pundits mocked the Bridezilla Accord. But civil rights organizations, veterans groups, and nearly every major military family association endorsed it. The county board, now devoid of Commissioner Brickman's influence and terrified of the federal scrutiny, had to listen. They scheduled a vote. But the Department of Justice moved first. Using the evidence compiled by the Pentagon's investigation and the county's own grand jury, the FBI opened a civil rights pattern and practice investigation into the entire sheriff's department. This is the tool used to reform police departments in Ferguson and Baltimore. It meant the federal government could sue to force systemic changes if discrimination was found. The sheriff, already on leave, resigned that same week. The legal consequences then arrived with precise final force. Deputy Mark Ryland, having cooperated, pled guilty to a single misdemeanor count of deprivation of rights. He was sentenced to 2 years probation, 6 months of house arrest, and permanent revocation of his law enforcement certification. In his allocution, he stated, "I was taught that certain complaints deserved certain responses. I didn't question it. I was wrong." He became a symbol of a broken system, not its mastermind. Commissioner Thomas Brickman and the former sheriff were indicted on felony charges of conspiracy and honest services fraud. Their trial revealed the full scheme, using coded complaints to harass the venue, directing favored deputies to respond aggressively, all to depress property values for a future land grab. Both were convicted. Brickman was sentenced to 41 months in federal prison. With the conspirators gone, the path to reform cleared. The county board, under immense pressure, passed a modified version of the Wedding Garden Accord. It established a civilian review board with real power. It repealed the vague, disturbing the peace, and amplified noise ordinances that had been weaponized for years. And it mandated the public, real-time release of police dispatch data, broken down by race and neighborhood. The sheriff's department entered into a 5-year federal consent decree, requiring implicit bias training, revised use of force policies, and external audits. For Jai-hoon Park, the victory was survival. With the harassment ended, his business rebounded. He established a nonprofit to provide low-cost venue rentals to minority and immigrant families for their celebrations, calling it Maya's Garden. For the Thorne family, the resolution was more personal and more painful. The legal wins couldn't give Maya back her wedding day. She struggled with PTSD, jumping at the sound of sirens. General Thorne, though vindicated, carried the guilt of having his family thrust into a national firestorm. He decided not to seek an extension to his term as vice chairman, announcing he would retire to focus on civil rights advocacy and his family. But Maya had one final request. She wanted to finish what was started. On a crisp autumn morning, with the same guests invited, she put on her repaired wedding dress. Her father wore his full military dress uniform once more. They returned to the Willow Creek Gardens. This time, there were no police, only a profound sense of resilience. They held the ceremony they were denied, exchanging the same vows at the same altar. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the guests erupted in cheers that echoed through the garden, a sound of pure joy, unchallenged. The story seemed to have reached its perfect, redemptive ending, but there was one final, surprising detail. Deputy Mark Ryland, after his probation ended, reached out to General Thorne through a lawyer. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for guidance. He had enrolled in a sociology program focusing on criminal justice reform, Moved by the unexpected request, General Thorne agreed to a single, private meeting. He later said of Ryland, he was a product of a system. Now he wants to understand it, to fix it. That is the only form of accountability that matters. The incident that began with a handcuff on a lace gown ended by toppling a local power structure, reforming a police department, and launching a national conversation about bias in quality-of-life policing. It proved that documented patterns of disparity are not abstract statistics. They are lived experiences, waiting for a catalyst to expose them. For General James Thorne, it was the hardest mission of his career because the battlefield was his own home. And for Maya, it was a brutal lesson that sometimes justice requires a fight that eclipses even your own happiness. As the general stood at his daughter's second wedding, watching her dance, he later told a reporter, "I have commanded armies, but that day, I learned the most powerful force isn't authority. It's the refusal to accept injustice, especially when it's dressed in a uniform and claims to be just doing its job." The story of the handcuffed bride and the four-star general became a modern parable, a reminder that no one is above the law, but also that no one is beneath its protection. But what happens when there's no general at the altar? The painful truth illuminated by this story is that Deputy Ryland's playbook works precisely because it usually doesn't get filmed, or if it does, the victim lacks the power to escalate it to the Pentagon. The research is unequivocal. Black Americans are nearly 12 times more likely than white people to report police misconduct during an interaction. The systems of complaint and review are often stacked against them. Maya Thorne's wedding had a 200-person witness box and a 4-star contingency plan. Most people have only their dignity, and that is too often crushed by the weight of procedure. The incident at Willow Creek Gardens exposes the two-tiered reality of policing in America. For some, a noise complaint is a conversation. For others, it's a handcuff. The data proves this disparity is not perception, it's documented pattern. It's in the zip codes targeted for enhanced enforcement, in the bonus structures for certain foreclosure rates, in the casual cruelty that becomes routine. The neighbor's 61st complaint wasn't an outlier. It was the system operating as designed, using the law to enforce a certain social order. General Thorne's retirement to civil rights advocacy and Deputy Ryland's turn to sociology are two sides of the same reckoning. One man from the pinnacle of power, the other from the ranks of its foot soldiers, both confronting the same malignant structure. Their unlikely convergence suggests that change requires pressure from both above and below. So the lingering question this story leaves us with isn't about one wedding or one deputy. It's this: in a country founded on equal protection, why does the weight of the law still fall so unevenly? And what are we, as a society, willing to do to rebalance those scales? The Wedding Garden Accord is just one model. Its true power will be measured in how many other communities dare to draft their own. If you found this deep dive into power, justice, and the moments that change everything compelling, make sure to subscribe. We untangle a new story of systemic shock and human resilience every week. Your subscription tells the algorithm you want more content that challenges the official narrative. Thanks for watching, and remember, the most powerful stories aren't about who has the most authority, but about who has the courage to question it.